getting aware that you're even in a box. I relate it to when we bring a newborn home, we keep it in a bassinet because a bassinet keeps the baby safe. The infant is so young, they have no idea they're in a bassinet. They're not trying to get out. They're happy as a clam in the bassinet. But then as we get to toddler stage, we're in a crib, we see that there's rails on that crib and we can climb out of that crib and there's options. And I think the same with us as humans with these beliefs. All of us are on different journeys. Some of us are further along and behind than others. And how do we get to be even aware that we're in a box? To be aware that you're in a box, you have to know there's choices outside the box.
Great title for a podcast, Blessings.
Thank you. Yes, I love it.
What a great meditation.
We are here to learn in the spirit of life.
I'm all about believe. You're about spreading blessings. It's great.
What about your blessings? What's the biggest blessing of life?
What a great question.
Because it's the Blessings podcast, I have to ask you, what is your biggest lesson in life?
My biggest lesson in life.
A whole lot of conversations with people about life and how those things manifest as blessings and lessons, and sometimes both.
It's my connection.
You're going to get schooled.
The journey is the journey.
What you and me are searching for are the blessings in this life.
Remember the reality of how sweet people are.
Spread blessings around the world.
You are the most remarkable energy. You make me pause, make me excited, make me think, and make me spontaneously come up with an answer. This is another one of those great moments in time in my life. Thank you for reaching out to ask if I would do the show.
Welcome back to the Blessings podcast, my friends. Today, I am here with a woman who is no stranger to success. She is a serial entrepreneur who owns a real estate brokerage, a property management firm, a title company, and a real estate school. She is active in community giving and also founded her own nonprofit organization. And she has Barbara Corcoran as her personal mentor. But Betsy Pepine is not all business. She is here today to speak to us about her life, her ideas, and the things on her mind that have contributed to her identity over the years, so we can see how the various boxes that we find ourselves occupying in life affect us as we navigate the human experience. Her new book, Breaking Boxes, Dismantling the Metaphorical Boxes That Bind Us, is a compilation of personal stories, the kind we all have, that comprised her life and contributed to her belief system and her worldview. It's a thoughtful book that demonstrates how self-inquiry teaches us how to live our best lives and activate our potential. Welcome, Betsy Pepine, to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
So Betsy, anyone looking at you from the outside in and all of your accomplishments would probably put you into the box labeled successful. But how do you define success?
It's definitely changed over the decades. So now in my 50s, for me, success is so much more simpler than it used to be. And for me personally, it's my goal. I look at it truly on a daily basis. And did my presence enhance the life of somebody else today? And I ask myself that every night. And that is absolutely my goal on a daily basis. And if I can say yes to that, then I've had a good day.
That's beautiful. So do you believe that we're here to influence and empower one another? That's our role as human beings?
Yeah, that is the mission in all of my companies is to improve and empower the lives of others.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, it is. And
I did, but not like in that phrasing.
Oh yeah. And it's stated everywhere. And It's my mission. And that's why it's my company's missions. And I do believe that's our calling here.
And how does that connect to how we relate to ourselves?
I do think that it is very difficult to improve and empower the lives of others if we do not have true self-love. And that has been a journey for me. And I think that is a struggle for a lot of people, especially women. And I just don't think you can be as authentic and as effective if you don't have compassion and love for self.
Mm-hmm. So because the things that you've been writing about, and obviously the things that have been on your mind over time have been deeply connected to self-awareness as a concept. So how do you see self-awareness and self-love as collaborative elements of the self?
I think that it's hard to truly love who you are if you are not self-aware. So I feel like it's a if then that. Because if you have self-love, but you don't have self-awareness, which that does exist, I just think there's a missing component there because you could be, I don't want to say loving the wrong thing because we are born good. We are innately good. So it's not that, but I just feel if you don't have self-awareness, it's you have self-awareness and you still love yourself. So it's not like you're in denial about who you are. You accept the flaws and the limitations of being human and being uniquely you, and you love yourself.
Yeah. So self-awareness allows you to love yourself, all of yourself, with all
Yeah.
of the things that are a part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That is a good definition. That's a great way of describing that. Okay. I feel like after reading your book that your stories are about your personal boxes and your perception of those boxes that are both internal and external. And we'll get into that. But you're not asking the reader to agree with you on everything. You're asking the reader to think
Correct.
about these stories, which I loved because I'll tell you, I didn't agree with everything you said. And there were things I really resonated with too, that I thought and I loved that as I was reading it, I got to think about myself. And that's what I think we're doing when we share our stories. So what are the things that enable us to be vulnerable enough to share personal stories like you did in this book? What kind of things did you have to tap into to put it out into the world?
I just went back up and just say that I'm so glad you said that because when I had my first meeting with my publisher, they said, what was the goal of the book? And I said to them, my goal is that a reader walk away thinking about something in their own lives just a little differently. Not any determination, but just it's causing them to pause and think about something in their own life that they may want to think about in a different light, a different lens, a different perspective than they hadn't considered before. So I appreciate you saying that because that was the goal of my book. But I think your question was what makes one able to be so vulnerable?
Yes.
Was that the question?
Or what tools did you use personally? Because a lot of people, they want to share about their lives. They want to, many people even feel they have a book inside of them and they want to share their stories, and they just can't get across that hump of being vulnerable enough to put it out there for the public view.
And it's interesting because people who know me are so surprised by the book because I'm not this open book. I don't present.
Now you are.
Yeah, no pun intended, but I don't present like that initially.
Yeah.
But when I sat down to write it, I didn't want to write. Everyone assumed it's going to be a book about business or how to build a real estate company or something like that. That I wanted to challenge myself. And I am most comfortable outside my comfort zone. I truly am. If I stay in my comfort zone too long, it is uncomfortable. I don't grow. I feel like I'm getting stagnant. So I consciously try to get outside my comfort zone on a daily basis. This book took a year, and every day I was truly outside my comfort zone. And I had a writing coach who I would have to send 10 pages every 2 weeks to. And I was at the beginning, I'm not a writer. This is my first book. And so I was struggling. And she said, Betsy, write as though no one is ever going to read this. And I did. And I assumed I would go back and take out all this stuff. And I didn't. I changed names for people. But other than that, I didn't change it. And it took me about a month to push the approve button for the manuscript to be set and fixed, and I couldn't change it because I'm not gonna lie, it was I felt like I was almost naked in front. You just feel so exposed. But for me, and I do this in my daily life, I'm like, what is it? What is this resistance? Breaking it down. And resistance usually comes from fear. So I'm like, okay, what am I fearing? And I do this again in my business life. Okay, what am I fearing? So I'm fearing loss. Usually it's when we fear, it's usually loss. We're not fearing that we're going to gain something beautiful. Usually we're fearing loss. And so for me, it was, am I going to lose some people? I'm sure people are going to look at me differently after reading that book, good or bad. Am I okay with that? Am I going to be okay if I might lose some social connection with people that I had previously if they know my views about certain things? That might happen. And am I okay with that? So I walked myself through each of the things that I thought I was fearing if I did this. And mentally I thought, okay, if that worst case scenario, if that happens, I'm gonna be fine. I can live with that. And the uncomfortableness of not putting it out there far exceeded me feeling far exceeded the vulnerability that I chose. Because if I didn't put it out there, it would be another, like I talk about in my book, so much of my life I felt contained and not being able to express my views and how I truly felt about things. And for fear of family of origin issues, friends and peers, my gender, my profession, my industry, things like that, it would just be falling into that same exact thing that I'm trying to get out of. I think that's what helped me overcome those fears and be more vulnerable.
Okay. I love that. I love that so many things that you just said, like the idea that your comfort zone is in itself a box for you, which is very interesting. But the concept of using the more practical tool of walking yourself through the consequences and then realizing that when you are vulnerable, that you actually bring yourself more into alignment with people, places, and things and experiences that are for you. And that enhances your life in the long run, even though it might bring a little pain in the short term.
Yeah. I think of it almost as musical chairs. There's going to be some musical chairs and readjusting, but then in the end, it's better. It's better for everybody. I don't want people in my social circle that are liking the inauthentic view of me or the view they think I have, but that's not really me. That's not serving either of us well. So yeah. And I think one of the things that I did that always helps me, a lot of fear is like it expands when you feel like it's the unknown. And even if it's the known, like we see it in real estate. In real estate, when we have an election, this is data, documented data. You can look at the data nationally. Sales stop. Home sales plummet the month, 2 months before the election. The day after the election, sales rebound and gain momentum. And the next year is even stronger than the year of the election because it doesn't matter which party wins. There's no more uncertainty.
Yeah.
So it's the uncertainty that causes fear. So for me, another practical tip for me is I literally write it down. I write down my fears. I write down the worst case scenario. Seeing it on paper makes it seem a lot more palatable than when it just manifests in your mind. It just seems so much bigger and scarier in your mind. But if you write it down on paper, it's okay. I can do that. That doesn't look scary. I can deal with that.
Okay. And what you're describing as you're saying that, it makes me feel like there are times when we want to put things into a nice little box, like putting your fear, naming it, and just putting it away somewhere can help to keep it contained.
That's very true. And same with your ego. I feel the same way with our ego because I think sometimes our ego gets in the way. And I do that. I'm visual. So whenever I feel like my ego is playing too big of a role in the decision I'm about to make, I'm like, Betsy, put your ego on the shelf. And I visually, like truly imagine my ego sitting on the shelf. And now me without my ego is going to move forward and make the decision. And that really helps me stay grounded as much as I can.
Oh, that's a beautiful exercise too. Good one. I'm gonna steal that one. I love that. All right. So I wanted to ask you a question about the idea of our beliefs and the origins of our beliefs. So you talk about these stories. This is a lot in what I teach in my role as a coach, mentor person. And that is that not just that our experiences and our childhood experiences shape our beliefs, but also the idea that we don't choose these necessarily for ourselves, that these could be things that are formed early in life that were chosen for us. And that once we get to a certain point in our lives of self-awareness, if we get there, we can make a decision about the beliefs that we have and whether or not they're serving us, or whether or not they're completely false, or whether they are limiting us or they're empowering us. So how can we recognize, and you're using storytelling really as the tool for that. So are there any other ways that we can help to recognize those mistaken or limiting beliefs and begin to tell ourselves new stories? And what did you learn about this as you were going through the process?
For me, recognizing them required therapy and meditation and yoga and bioenergetics work and EMDR and journaling, because I really wanted to understand why I was unhappy. It started out as I was entering midlife. And like you said at the beginning, like on paper, it looked like my life was great, but I was unhappy. And so I was determined to figure out what is the source of this unhappiness. And the common thread was this feeling of containment and being in these boxes that I didn't necessarily choose. So it's getting aware that you're even in a box. I relate it to when we bring a newborn home, we often put it in a bassinet's a box. And and we keep it in a bassinet because a bassinet keeps the baby safe. The infant is so young, they have no idea they're in a bassinet. They're not trying to get out. They're happy as a clam in the bassinet. But then as we get to toddler stage, we're in a crib, we see that there's rails on that crib and we can climb out of that crib and there's options. And I think the same with us as humans with these beliefs. Some of us, all of us are on different journeys. And so we're further along. Some of us are further along and behind than others. And how do we get to be even aware that we're in a box? To be aware that you're in a box, you have to know there's choices outside the box. For me, what I've learned is my body tells me that first before my mind. And I grew up in a household where it was all cerebral. It was all, what do we think? What do the facts tell us? We weren't asked, how do you feel? What is your body telling you? So getting in touch with my feelings was a whole process in and of itself. And if I stay in my body and I'm aware of the feelings that my body is absorbing, that is my first clue that a box may no longer be serving me. So that's a strategy to start getting yourself out of a box, is to getting more aware of what boxes you're in that are no longer serving you. You're going to feel that in your body, most likely before your mind knows you're in the wrong box. And in the book, I hope I make the point, not all boxes are bad. Some serve us at certain points in our lives. I tend to overstay my welcome in some boxes more than others. So I think that would be the first thing, is just really getting in tune with what boxes you might be in. Another thing for me is I just start to question why. Why am I doing this? So many things we do, like you said, it's how we do it, how we were raised. It would be so hard not to do it because that's all we know. But just asking, is this really right for me? And is this what I believe in? Is this consistent with my values? I went through a exercise of identifying my personal values. In my companies, we spend a lot of time with that. My whole company knows our core values. How many of us go home and create core values for ourselves and our families? Maybe not so much, but we all would probably say our families are much more important than our businesses. Yet, how many of us can say we know the top 3 or 4 core values of our family? So creating those, understanding what those are, and then screening everything through those values. And is it consistent with what you truly believe in? Helps you stay on course, I think, and out of boxes that do not serve you.
And how did you make the connection to storytelling?
I don't think I did that consciously. I just think that is how I learn best, is through story. And I'm an incessant reader, and I'm drawn to true stories of people. I'm for some reason, I'm not drawn to fiction, but true, real stories where I can see myself in their shoes. That's what I'm drawn to. So I think that was just what made sense to me, because that's what I remember stories like that. When people tell me stories that are impactful and emotional and vulnerable, those are the stories that are so impactful to me. And so I wanted to emulate that for others to get my message across.
It's a beautiful technique. Can you give an example of a story that formed the root of a belief for you that you later decided to give up?
A lot of those. Are you saying?
Like something that you changed your mind or decided wasn't serving you any longer?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot. So the good mom box. Okay. The story I told myself, I was in my 30s and I had a 1-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old daughter, and I got divorced. And so I was a single mom raising them. To compensate in my mind, because I was raised where that's considered a broken home. And I had some shame around that. And so to compensate for that, I feel that I I don't want to say protected, was over involved in my children's life to make sure that nobody would ever judge me about being a bad mom or a single mom box, whatever that conjures up in your mind. But I didn't want that. So I went the other way, and I knew every test assignment, every homework assignment, I quizzed my kids, every paper was turned in perfectly. I was everywhere. I was involved in the school classroom. I was just what I thought in my mind was the good mom box. And I would have at that time told you that I was probably scoring about 100 in that box. My oldest daughter enters first grade, and she has her first homework assignment, like a true homework assignment where you have to bring a project in. Project was pick a famous person that you admire and do a poster board on that person. She picked Rosa Parks. So that weekend, we spent the weekend outlining a poster board. I painstakingly drew every line in pencil of where text had to go lightly, told her where to print, what to print. Let's practice this before you put it on the poster board. Then I would erase the line that I had drawn so it looked like it was perfectly straight. I had it very aesthetically pleasing where all the graphs were going to go and the pictures, and it looked magnificent when she finished. Because not magnificent, but magnificent for a first grader, because I had done so much of it. And so we're walking into the class to bring it into Mrs. Walton, and I see these kids coming by me in her class, and the boards are rolled up, they're torn, they've got sneaker marks. Somebody walked over their poster board with the sneaker marks across it. The dog chewed a corner. The handwriting's going down, slanted. And I remember thinking, man, what mother would allow that child to bring that poster board to school? And I go into the classroom and I see these kids' faces beaming, standing in line, waiting to show Mrs. Walton their first project that they did on their own. And I look at my daughter's face, and she's not beaming. She's not happy. And I thought, what have I done here? Why am I behaving in this way? And what message am I telling my daughter by doing it for her? I'm basically telling her she's not competent, or I don't believe she's competent to doing it herself. And I'm like, what is my long-term goal? My long-term goal is to raise happy, independent children. I don't care if they have straight A's. I don't care and this was where I had to put my ego on the shelf. I recognized I didn't want Mrs. Walton to think Maria came from a broken home and that I wasn't an involved parent. And I cared more about what Mrs. Walton thought of me than the message I was giving to my child. I walked to the car, tears streaming down my face, and I did a complete 180. And that night I stopped cold turkey. I taught my children how to do the laundry. I taught them how to make their lunches. I stopped quizzing them because I wanted them to know they could do it on their own. And so that's an example of a box that I thought I understood. I thought it served me well until it didn't.
But the way that you are able to ask yourself those questions, that helps you so much. I don't think that most people can do that or choose to do that. So it's very interesting to do that and how valuable that is. I love that example for people who are stuck in a situation like that where it doesn't feel good, and then asking yourself those kinds of questions like you ask, and then being able to change, because that shows growth mindset. You're not going to be fixed in a particular point of view, which is really the point of your book, which I love.
My dad is 83 years young. Every morning, he sends my sister and I and all his grandchildren a good morning message. It's always something uplifting, positive, and encouraging. And it always says, I love you. We all look forward to this, and we know that Granddad won't be around forever. So we really cherish these messages of love and empowerment. My dad loves to say, every day is a new opportunity. And that is what he taught me. That, along with how to work smarter, hold family dear, and go after my dreams. I know there are people out there who go through the motions every day with no one saying good morning, no encouraging word, and to support a positive mindset. And there are others who are doing all the right things, but still need a little nudge to create and maintain positive habits throughout the day. So in my dad's honor, I've created Your Positive Moment. Research clearly shows the benefits of positivity and connection. A recent Gallup poll showed a significant percentage of the world is lonely. Your Positive Moment solves these problems. These are messages that come directly to your phone first thing in the morning, so you can begin every day on a high note. The message includes a loving greeting, an affirmation, a daily reflection, and an easy action step to get you going in the direction of growth and fulfillment and transformation, and to help you stack up good habits. A simple daily message has the power to change your life. Get started with your beneficial morning message habit for free. yourpositivemoment.com.
They say that if we deny a part of our own life story, that we are essentially erasing a part of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be able to accept everything about your story, even the parts that you don't like,
Mm-hmm.
in order to embrace your identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of identity, the theme of identity, comes up throughout your book. So I wanted to ask you first, how do you define identity?
It's funny because I'm an identical twin.
Oh, that's right.
And identity is very important to me because I am an identical twin. And I think that's something that my parents really did well with us, because they separated us in first grade. We did not dress alike. They really focused on separate identities, which I know some twins struggle with because of that.
Mm.
So I think I'm more sensitive to identity than perhaps singletons. So your question was, how do I identify?
How do you define identity?
That's a great question that I've never been asked before. For me, it's me stripped away, stripped of everything I have and own, and like what is left. It's not, because I think sometimes people hide their identity or protect their identity, have these things in front of them that shield them. Like they could hide behind their credentials, or they could hide behind their family of origin, or their whatever they want to choose to, because they don't want their identity shown. So for me, it's stripping all of that away, and it's what you're left with. And that's what I don't know if you've ever done any bioenergetics work, but that is what I feel like that's what it did for me, is and still feel valued, and that you can take up space in this world because we're uniquely who we are. We don't have to have degrees behind our name. We don't have to be in a certain friend group. We don't have to have a certain number in the bank account. We are truly so beautiful just the way we are. To me, it's our identity is what is left after you strip away all these, I don't want to say facades, but all these things we accumulate materially and non-materially throughout our life. But what do we have that's left when that's stripped away?
Interesting. That's like the core. So that's like the basis, the core of a person.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think of identity, and I used to believe, this is something I've changed my mind about over the years. I used to believe that we're in control of our identity, that your identity comes from the self and it's only what you say it is. But now I know that identity is also formed from the outside in, that society has an identity for you. That's what you talk about with your boxes. And then you can push back against that as well. It's like an interplay. Your identity is like an interplay between that core self and societal things that are penetrating from the outside. It's like intrinsic and extrinsic. And the way that you write about this is in a way that allows for flexibility between those things, because you're thinking about boxes. Sometimes you want to stay in them. You might come in, you might go out, you might revisit it. Those may be self-imposed. They may be imposed by society. And it's like this whole very flexible evolution of identity, the whole thing. How much do you think about identity and these boxes as being self-driven? And how much of this is driven by the outside society, external forces?
Two thoughts there. One is, I grew up believing, based on my family of origin, that everything is very black and white. And boxes were too. And I think I even write about it in my book. My mother had this thing called the S list. It was her shit list. And once a person was on it, you never got off it. And that's how she raised us to believe people are either good or bad. And someone can have this long history of great work, however we define it, and have one mishap and they're done. They've been expelled. They're no longer. So it was very rigid. And I don't believe that anymore. But growing up, that's all I knew. So now I do believe, including boxes, there's just all this gray. And so I like that idea that nothing is really fixed. We're all of this. So that's one thing. So then in terms of to what degree are boxes intrinsic or external, I definitely think it's a combination of both, because just looking at my own life, there are so many boxes I put myself in. But again, some of them I wanted to, like the author box. I wanted to be an author in my mind, because I grew up, I love books. I love the messages that those authors gave me. I wanted to be able to do that for others. So that was a box that I had a strategy to get into. So a lot of boxes are like that, but then other boxes, especially ones we just find ourselves in, I think that we are placed in not voluntarily, like our gender. There's so many examples of, for me, being female and boxes people have put me in just solely based on the fact that I'm female. And that's not at all. In fact, that wasn't the way I was raised at all. We had no boys in our families. We were treated, we mowed the lawn. We didn't really mow the lawn because we don't have lawn, but we did all the yard work. We did the traditionally, from what I've heard, if you have boys in the house, they tend to do the yard work and the women stayed in the house. I don't know, because we didn't have brothers, but we did everything. And we just did traditionally things that people would think of, I think, as masculine. We did that growing up. So I didn't have that, but I did feel it in other ways. So I think it's an equal part of boxes being intrinsically imposed upon us and externally imposed upon us.
You mentioned a few times the characteristics of your household being very cerebral, black and white, and interesting. And in your book, you bring up a lot your relationship with your mother. And I think that the mother wound is something that humans explore. I certainly have explored it in my own life and in different ways. And I'm just curious about how you feel about that. What's your relationship like with your mother? How do you think it contributed to all these boxes? Do you consider the mother wound? Do you have a mother wound? Does it mean anything in your life? So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. So for years, I was very angry. And it was hard because I know I grew up with so much privilege. So then I felt guilty about my anger because I never worried about food on the table, what I was going to wear to school, if a parent was going to show up at a school, at an extracurricular activity. Like, I never had those issues. So I was so blessed in those ways. Where there was a void in my mind was the emotional part. Physical affection was non-existent. Being told that I was loved was non-existent. So there was just major gaps. As an adult, I didn't recognize that growing up, but as an adult, I saw the gaps. And I had a lot of anger as an adult. But then, I don't know, about 10 or 15 years ago, I think just through a lot of reading, because I wasn't even in therapy. I had not gone to therapy, just having an acceptance and understanding my mother's childhood, that she truly did the best she could. She had very limited, no role models on the female side and very limited resources. So I know in her heart, she wasn't trying to be anything but the best mother, just like I tried with my children. And I'm sure they have their own stories about me. So I don't have that anger. I have acceptance and compassion for her. She has dementia now and she's not able to read the book or understand it, nor would she doesn't have the personality where we really could freely express that. Everything had to always be really positive and couldn't really be authentic with our feelings. But I'm okay with that. That's just not something that's going to happen in my lifetime. But I do have compassion for her and I'm so appreciative of everything she has given me. Yeah.
Yeah. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think your relationship with your mom had any effect on your decision to not be a quote stay-at-home mom?
I was a single mom at 1 and 2, so I didn't really have a choice to stay at home. But I don't think it had an effect at all. My personality type, even if I was married, had stayed married, I would have worked. I just have, it's just, I have to, it could be in the house, but I could never, my personality type, I could never be a full-time stay-at-home mother and not have businesses and entrepreneurial things going on. That's just in my blood. My mother has said that from day one, I was always very entrepreneurial. And I feel like that is part of my identity.
Yeah.
And I just wouldn't be happy in a role like that. And I had a lot of guilt about that when I went back to work because a lot of my friends stayed at home. But I also recognize that not everybody's suited personality wise to play that role full time. And I certainly don't think I was.
Yeah. But there's lots of ways of being a parent. And I love that you just followed you were true to yourself. You followed your authenticity in that,
Yeah.
which is, it's interesting. Yeah. So the whole thing about whether to stay home or not stay home, and obviously most people cannot do that even these days. But I love that you talked about working through your feelings on that. Like it did come up, you felt like you had some guilt, but then ultimately you were being authentic. And I think that probably came through to your girls in a very positive way.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree. They have such a different mom now. Like if you talked about some having experiences happen to you and just in general, but I do truly believe, and it's taken me decades to get here, but everything is happening for us, not to us. And now when something that I wouldn't have chosen to happen in my life happens to me, I can immediately pivot. I really don't get angry or upset. It's almost like I'm an observer and saying to the universe, what are you trying to teach me? And it's a beautiful way because before I would get angry and frustrated and all this emotion. And now it's just like, how may I serve? What can I learn? And it reduces you don't fear anything because it's all a lesson. There's no failure. It's just a lesson or a learning or a pivot. But there's nothing to fear. For me, there's nothing to fear. It's just, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I can relate to that. That's exactly how I feel in my life right now. And I'm also in my 50s. So I don't know if it's because I'm older that I'm able to do that because I have a certain level of experience and maturity, or could I have done that? I guess it doesn't matter asking that question, but sometimes I do wish that I could have done that earlier in my life.
I know, I agree. It would have been much more simpler.
It would have been so much more peaceful, but oh my gosh. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about money because you say in your book that you are someone who makes money easily. And gosh, there are so many of us that would love to say that about ourselves. We'd love to be in that box, the money-making box. So what do you think are some of the things in your life or your core traits that have made that true for you? And how could people begin to emulate that prosperity mindset for themselves?
That's interesting. I've never been asked about money. I do find, and not in a boastful way, I do feel like I attract money. I find it. Like I found a $20 bill 2 days ago. I find money. I literally find money everywhere.
How do you do it?
And it's funny because my mother would always say, Betsy, you find money everywhere. And I've always found money. And I remember as a kid, I was thinking through it because my mother would always say, "How'd you find it?" And I said to myself, "That's interesting. How do I find it?" I realized 99% of the money I find is laying on the ground. So I was subconsciously looking on the ground. I guess I look on the ground more than most people, but I found a credit card the other day. I just find money. There was an interesting, and I don't, please let me just say something. I could care less how much money I make. That's not important to me. For me, money represents freedom. And so if I have money, that means I have freedom. That's the only reason that I care to have money. I could care less. I live in a 1,600 square foot house. I don't live extravagantly at all, but it just gives me so much peace of mind to know that I have freedom of choice and I don't have to take a job that I don't want to take, or I can take a vacation if I want to take a vacation. So it gives me so much freedom. So that's the only reason why that money is interesting to me. But I think I've always had an abundance mindset. Like I don't have a scarcity mindset. I think I was raised believing that money is everywhere. And as long as you provide value, there is money. Time isn't everywhere. So many other things, we have such limited resources, but money is truly everywhere. You just have to create value. And if you are confident in your ability to create value for others, you are confident that you will always make money. And I feel like that's where my confidence comes in, because I truly believe that I can figure out ways to add value to people's lives that they're willing to exchange their money for. And that all stems from a mindset of abundance and not scarcity. I think the other thing that helps is, and this is I preach this with my agents, strong believer, and my parents also taught us this, but multiple streams of income. It really, I don't care what you do, you can't really rely on, I don't believe I couldn't sleep well at night if I only had one source of income and putting all my eggs in one basket. So growing up, my parents always had real estate on the side. So I started buying real estate in my 20s. And by the time I was divorced, we had two houses we had bought. And then I just continued to buy houses. That gave me such peace of mind, because I knew if I didn't bring in a dime, we could live on rice and beans with the income that these houses were generating. So that gives you freedom to try other things and not be afraid, because you're not living paycheck to paycheck. So as a strategy, I would absolutely recommend people do that. And then also, just in terms of money, I know it's old fashioned, but I'm a big proponent of living debt free and paying yourself first. And if you implement those strategies, and I taught these things to my children when they were young, you'll be set. The compounding growth is incredible. There's nothing that's stronger than that. And so the earlier you can start leveraging that, the more money you will attract in your life.
I think it's important for us, especially as women, to talk about money and to be proud of it. So many people have shame around money. It's crazy. They feel like,
really?
yes, people
But shame, like they don't shame. So
they'll feel guilty, or they'll associate it with something negative.
if they have it,
they'll block it, or if they get it. Yeah, or they'll think things like, okay, if I had a lot of money, then maybe my friends wouldn't like me anymore. Maybe if I had a lot of money, then I would have to give it all to my children. If I had a lot of money, or I've even felt this if I was buying a lottery ticket. There used to be this drive-through lottery ticket thing in my town a long time ago. And I would drive through, and inevitably I'd get behind somebody in an old beater car buying their lottery tickets. And I'd think, I don't deserve to win the lottery because that guy needs it much more than I do. And so it's just like little things like that block us from considering money as a positive thing. Like you said, freedom. That's what money is about. It's about freedom. You're very free about that, like that belief. I think a lot of us grow up with shame about money. I remember even being little, and my parents would insinuate that those things are for the rich people. That's not for us.
Wow.
And there's so much of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
So maybe that's a box that no longer serves you.
It's definitely, yeah.
Okay.
I think I'm out of it, but probably partially still have one toe in it. I don't know. But yeah, no. And I love what you said about real estate early on. That was one of the things that I did as a single mother as well. And I do think it's accessible. People may think it's not accessible to them, but it is. There are creative ways of financing things. There are lots of ways to get your hands on real estate.
Yeah.
And it is an excellent way to provide stability for yourself as a single parent. And, as a single woman, if that's your vote, or even in a partnership to have your own thing. Even if you're in a partnership, you should still have your own thing.
Yeah.
Your own stuff. All right. So I wanted to ask you one other that there's so many things I want to ask you, but I have one thing that I thought was really interesting. So you touched on the kind of age box, which kind of struck a nerve with me because I feel sensitive about that box myself, the age box. But then I got to thinking, one of the things that you made me think about was just because something is derogatory doesn't mean that I have to perceive it as negative. So even if the person intends it to be derogatory, I don't have to perceive it that way. And so you talked a little bit about dyeing your hair. Obviously, I'm in my 50s. I do visit the salon, but I loved that you brought up that part of aging and people who like Andy McDowell, who has let her hair come in and looks so beautiful. But I don't have the courage to do that. And I'm okay with that right now. I think there will be a time in my life. But it's funny because the other day I went into a farmer's market. It was actually, I wasn't feeling good and I wasn't looking that great. I didn't have makeup on and I had an eye infection that day. So I went to this farm stand on my way home to pick up some honey because I needed honey, and I'm paying for the honey. And the woman at the cash register says to me, "Are you a senior?" And I was like, no, I didn't even say anything. I was so taken aback. And then she just backpedaled. She was like, "Oh, everyone looks so young these days. I just want to make sure I gave you your discount." I was like, "No, I'm not a senior." I didn't even answer. She was like, she realized, but it was just the first time someone had ever asked me that question or said that to me. And it struck a nerve because I am so sensitive about aging. And I wanted to know your feelings about that box for you and how people can deal with that. Because there's a lot of us in our 50s that are listening right now that we don't think of ourselves as old. I don't think of myself as a senior or even close to it.
Yeah.
But when people say things like that to us, we don't have to take it to heart. We can find ways to perceive that differently.
Right.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. The first time I was asked that, I was in my 40s. So you're already ahead of me there. It's interesting because my identical twin sister, and we do look exactly alike, during COVID decided to go gray. And I have not gone gray.
So you can see what you would look like.
I know. And it was interesting for me because I'm like looking at myself when I see her. And I don't wish I didn't dye my hair. I do dye my hair. I don't dye it for other people because I really don't care what they think. I dye it because I don't like seeing gray when I look in the mirror, and I want to feel good. And I don't feel good. So I so admire people who don't have that feeling when they look in the mirror, but I do. And so I'm okay dyeing my hair. Now, I wouldn't be okay dyeing my hair if I was doing it because I didn't like what other people thought. So I guess I somehow rationalized that in my mind. But I also do Botox, which it's like, am I denying that I'm getting older? No, and I don't want to look 20, but I don't mind looking 45. I'm 55. So I don't mind looking a little younger. So if it makes me feel good and gives me energy, in my mind, I'm okay with that.
It doesn't mean that you lack confidence or self-esteem to do things that make you feel good.
Right. I exercise because it makes me feel good.
Yes.
Right.
And it's good for you. And then that contributes to the self-love, which you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. And I think everyone has their own kind of line where they say, I'll do X, Y, and Z, but I stop here. Everyone's line is different. But I don't like the whole ageism and the fact that truly the decision to not dye your hair is such an important topic to be an article in a major magazine. Like that's for females. That is just so crazy to me and demeaning.
It's a good point. It's true.
Yeah, it's just absolutely insane. And nobody questions why George Clooney has decided not to dye his hair.
He's distinguished.
I don't like the double standard there at all.
Yeah.
At all. And I don't like it when, and I have heard so I have several friends that have gone gray, and I have heard other people behind their back say, why did they let themselves go? To me, what does that mean? Like the fact that you're sporting your natural hair color means you've let yourself go? I don't like that judgment.
No.
That bothers me. And it just perpetuates. Every family and every culture has a currency. And in our country, the currency is youth. And that is where the value is placed. And that's not universal. That's not true in every culture. And I do wish we as a society would move away from that and find more value in the mature.
Yeah. That would be nice.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. I have really enjoyed talking with you. I feel like we could definitely get into great conversation over a cup of coffee.
But when you move to Florida,
when I move, I know, when you find me a house in Florida. But I do have to ask you my final question, which is, because it's the Blessings podcast, I want to ask you what your top lesson and your top blessing in life are. So you want to start with the lesson or the blessing?
The lesson is that truly that everything is happening for us, not to us. That's totally changed my perception of my life and how I react to things or not react to things anymore. So that would probably be just a huge lesson for me. Blessing, a lot of, I would say my family, things like that in general, but also I got divorced. I suddenly found myself divorced and laid off within a very short period of time, months. And at the time it was catastrophic. I tell people I was sitting on a 3-legged stool. In my life were my kids, my marriage, and my job. And 2 of the 3 legs of the stool were knocked out from under me. And when you're sitting on a 3-legged stool and 2 legs go out, you find yourself on the ground. Mm-hmm. And it took me a good 6 months. I moved back into my home. I moved back into my childhood bedroom. My 2 girls were down the hall in my sister's old bedrooms. Regroup, figure out what am I going to do next? What's the next act? What's the plan? It was the best thing that ever happened to me, the best. And so that I would say is one of my biggest blessings. And I love now. So when I'm faced with something pretty, I don't want to say catastrophic, but pretty life-changing, I'm not so worried because I know something beautiful is going to come from it. And I might not see it right now, but I know it's coming. So I think that's a blessing.
Yeah. I love that you said that. That's exactly the premise of Blessings for me, is the idea that there's always something good that can come out of even the most difficult experiences, even if you don't see it right in the moment.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you, Betsy. I've loved talking to you.
Yes,
and
so
thanks for
Thank
everything you shared. And if people should definitely go and pick up a copy of your book. Can you tell us where people can find you, how they can get your book?
Sure. Yeah. So the book is called Breaking Boxes, Dismantling the Metaphorical Boxes That Bind Us. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. And it should be on every major book retailer by now. It launched September 23rd. But those are the main places. And then I'm on all the social handles with my name at Betsy Pepine. And then my website is betsypepine.com. And you can sign up for my free newsletter there.
Okay. I love that. And what part of Florida are you in case anyone's looking for real estate?
Yes. So we're in North Central Florida in a town called Gainesville, but we service the north half of the state. So coast to coast up to the Georgia state line. And we start about just north of Orlando and go all the way to the Georgia state line.
Okay. I want a house on the beach in Ponte Vedra.
Oh, I can help you. Very nice.
All right. Thank you, Betsy. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, everybody's still listening. will you go give a 5-star review to this podcast? Mitzi puts in so much effort and so much love into this. She's brilliant. She deserves it. So I am going to go right now. By the way, by the time you hear this and you go give your 5-star review, you should be able to go find my 5-star review of this podcast. But I just want to thank you for what you're doing.